Holy shit! Hey, hey guys, we're live here with episode. I think this would be 15 of the Overcoming podcast here with
Hi.
me, Ben
Hi.
Bourne, here with Robert Mailing, my new amazing network host, leader of the Sioux Empire Podcast Network. Pretty
Yep,
excited to
yep.
be working with him. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about the Sioux Empire Podcast Network and what you do, Robert.
The Sioux Empire podcast is a product of my probably mental illness with
Hmm.
podcasts, as this will officially be the ninth podcast that I'm listed as a producer on.
Wow.
Well, ninth that's still running because I've actually had some other ones. I believe it or not, some people would be shocked by this. I have canceled a podcast before, just one or
This
two
one.
maybe, but yeah. So what I do is I like to give local people a chance to express themselves in different ways. We've got podcasts on the network about music. What we say is comedy, Sioux Empire news, comedy, music, and culture. So, like my main podcast, the Sioux Empire podcast, or the flagship one that was the one that started it, is basically like a kind of like the Daily Show, but for just Sioux Falls and South
Okay.
Dakota news. Uh, then not all the podcasts are totally locally focused. Like our
Mm.
comedy ones can be a lot broader. Urban Indians podcast is probably one of my biggest draws. That is with Gabriel Nightshield, and that podcast has been featured on USA Today and NPR.
Wow.
Big audience in the Native community, and we're gonna later today we'll be on Urban Indians podcast talking about the results of the NAMI Awards. So that should be
Ooh.
pretty exciting.
That will be
And,
exciting.
and let's see. So then we've got my paranormal investigation, kind of like my version of Coast to Coast AM Macabre Grimoire, where I have a psychic medium and a magician sit here with me while I play historian, and we talk about all the weird and creepy things that go on all over the world.
That sounds.
Dresch Code Comedy. That's we're doing a big episode of that tonight with a whole bunch of special guests. It's going to be that show is always really ruckus and really funny, so be sure to check that out. Oh, have I plugged enough of them?
I'm not
There's
sure. We can get a few more in there.
okay, okay. So if you are interested, this one is very local. If you're interested in like city hall pod or politics, uh, if you're familiar with the blog South Dakota, uh, Scott Erishman does a podcast here in our studio called the South Dakota Podcast, and he gets lots of local newsmakers, gossips, reporters, city council members, stuff like that, and they just talk about what's going on at City Hall. And then we also have Peter Pischke, who does the Happy Warrior podcast, which is a right wing podcast with a positive spin and outlook. So if that's your persuasion and that's the kind of political news you like, be sure to check that show out. That's also loads of fun. Let's see. And then I just spent this entire weekend writing scripts for a podcast I have coming out in 2019 called Edge Case, which is going to be a sci-fi mystery horror anthology podcast. I'm really excited about this one. This will be my first scripted podcast with
Yeah.
voice actors and like big performances and
Yeah.
get me into script writing again. It's really exciting, and
Yeah.
I'm pumped for it.
That's really exciting. Is that going to be episodic?
Yes, it's going to be an anthology.
Okay.
Although there may be Easter eggs that link episodes and stuff like that.
Okay.
That's all I'll say about that. 2 episodes written so far, so obviously I haven't done too much of that yet, but I have outlines and plans. And sorry,
geez.
I could do an whole episode about what's going on with that.
Oh yeah,
But
for sure.
we'll
But two
get more of
episodes.
that as that gets closer because we're looking at fall of 2019 to launch
yeah.
that. It's going to start like in the summer, and then because we're going to do 10 episodes, and then it'll end on Halloween night, 2019.
Wow, that's going to be an ambitious project.
It's a super
That
ambitious
sounds
project.
really exciting. But sometime we'll have to get you on here specifically talk about you, yourself, and your overcoming story.
Oh,
Which would be
absolutely.
super fun. Because yeah, so for all those Sioux Empire podcast regulars, for anyone who is joining us either previously or new that isn't aware of what we do, so this is going to be the Overcoming podcast with me, your host, Caleb Van Vorn. It's all about stories of overcoming, right? So if you're familiar, probably aren't familiar with me or anything that I've been through in my life, but back in 2015, I underwent my first brain surgery, right? I have a genetic disease that causes tumors, and so I had the first of what will be many brain surgeries back in 2015, and the results of the surgery were great. But the results for me were pretty catastrophic. I was disabled for a while physically, but then huge mental disabilities came about as that just huge upticks in anxiety and depression and trauma that went along with that disabled me for a really long time. And so I started this podcast back in October of 2017. Wow, 2017, almost a year ago to the day. We're pretty close up on that year anniversary. As basically an initial way for me to, one, be able to do some self validation and talk about what I had done to overcome many of the struggles I've been facing, as well as a way for me to begin to share the tips, tricks, techniques, everything that I was doing to overcome, right, and to move forward. And then it kind of evolved in me bringing on other people who have their own stories of overcoming, so that as time goes on, we can bring more and more guests on, and more people can listen, and they can start to hear stories of how they've overcome any obstacle, any struggle in their lives, no matter how big or small, right? And the specific techniques that they use to overcome those things. And so our listeners can take those and apply them to their own lives and more quickly and efficiently overcome their own struggles rather than becoming bogged down and trying to, find their own path, right? Learning from people who have gone before is always a really, really big advantage over trying to figure things out yourself. And oh, we're zooming in on me here. I'm looking sexy.
Get you a little more center framed because right now it's like you're just talking to like you're on a little edge of a wide open couch.
Yeah,
There you go.
just true.
This is a little more
Like,
conversational.
yeah, I'm a big dude, right? But I'm a small dude on this couch, which is nice. It's way nicer than the folding chair that I used to record my podcast in, which is super nice. So I suppose we're going to talk a little bit about, today, just kind of my decision to come under this network, right? As well as kind of what I've been up to in the past 6 months regarding, kind of my hiatus from the podcasting world. So, yeah, so about 6 months ago, I think I recorded what would be my last published episode with a good friend of mine, Clumsy D, or Dustin. Clumsy D is his Twitch gamer name. Dustin Clum is his real name. And it was a really, really amazing episode. I will probably be publishing it here soon as kind of my backlogged episodes go. Be a good one to check out. We talked about some really cool stuff, including his raid by Ninja. Which was really awesome, and I happened to be present for. But
I have
after that,
no idea what that means, but
right, which would be really, really cool. All the kids out there sure as hell know who Ninja and Fortnite are.
oh, Fortnite, I know that one.
Yeah, and so
I know the Fortnite. Sorry.
yeah, my friend there went from all of a sudden averaging 20 to 30 viewers to all of a sudden having 100,000 people watching him at once.
Holy crap!
So it's a pretty big deal for him that night. It was the night I actually got to know him, right? And then we talked about that a couple of weeks later, and it was a really good time. But after that, as I've kind of talked about before, I launched a business in February of 2018 called Van Born Media. We help local businesses leverage the power of the internet to make more money, specifically through storytelling. Right, storytelling is a big, big influence on my life, and I think it's the key to any good marketing and any sale that you're ever going to get. And so,
That's interesting because marketing nerd here. Native marketing, that's really what that is. Is like you can't just go buy my soap flakes.
yep,
We are in the era that you need to tell the story of the
yeah,
soap flakes and why you should care about that story and identify with it more personally.
and so that's one of the reasons I started Van Born Media, because one, so many businesses, specifically local businesses, are really, really, really bad at telling their stories, and also the power of the internet, which is amazing, is that it gives people the power and the leverage to mass share their story, right? Mass get the attention for super cheap, right? The cost of that attention and the ability to tell your story is just ridiculous, and so many businesses are underutilizing it right now. And so that is the goal of Van Born Media, right? And so between starting and launching that in February, um, and that was really starting to gain steam, gain momentum around April, which is the last time I published an episode. And then in personal life, I got sick for a while there. I had a brain tumor scare for a while, which was a bit of a setback for me. It turned out to be vertigo.
Oh,
And crazy thing is that like I've never understood how vertigo could be as debilitating as it is. But just the tiniest little thing, because you're not aware, kind of in your ear canal, there's these little crystals, kind of calcium. They're sitting there, and I started going back to the gym in March, and my first time, me being me, I overworked myself and I fainted.
oof.
Fell right out of a curling machine and smacked my head real good. Got a
Oh,
concussion. But thought it was fine, right? The few weeks after that, I started to get bouts of dizziness and nausea, and then it got so debilitating I couldn't get out of bed
oof.
the last couple of weeks of May. And me, because I have brain tumors, diagnosed brain tumors, as
Sure.
well as the fact that I'd gone through a brain surgery 2.5 years before, I
Yeah.
was freaking out. And so some depression came in there and kind of put a little bit of halt to my business, right, as well as everything else in my life. But it turned out being vertigo. Got one of those little crystals knocked loose, and it was floating around in my ear and
Oof.
making my head think it was different places than my eyes were telling it. So but we just got it diagnosed, figured out what it is, got it treated, and it was amazing that a simple maneuver done, for maybe 30 minutes, once a day, well, 2 times over 2 weeks, right? Completely treated it and made it disappear,
Nice.
which is just amazing to me. But after that, I kind of dove straight back into my business. But then I picked up a day job, because my business wasn't generating the income that I wanted it to. At that point,
Yeah.
and I'd been completely unemployed, not bringing in income since November of 2015. Um, and so I got a day job at a little company on the Inc. 5000 list here in the Sioux Empire, called Weiser Distributing.
Oh,
We sell anything and everything you could think of, right? But we sell on all kinds of e-commerce websites, Amazon, eBay, Shopify, our own websites, Walmart. Sold on Sears. Don't think we're going to anymore since they filed bankruptcy last
yeah.
week.
that might
Um,
that ship
but
might not land.
yeah, but I think we're on track to do some 65 million in revenue this year.
Nice.
Really exciting. So I got a job there. Started July 9th, and then my business is now starting to boom more than ever before. And
Excellent.
I am going crazy, and I don't have enough time for anything in my life. But because I'm starting to experience so much success, right? I'm just like, oh hey, I want to come talk about this, and my continued journey of overcoming on my podcast again. And I think there's still really great stories to tell. And so a couple weeks ago, I think it was almost a month ago now, actually. Called up Robert here. We got something set up, and so we're going to be here today now, relaunching the Overcoming podcast. I think now that I'm thinking about it, we're going to call this episode 1.2, rather than episode 15, just because it feels more like that to me. I think we'll just backlog the other 14 episodes, because kind of a whole nice little sexy little relaunch here, which is something that I'm really excited about.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Happy to have you.
yeah.
And it's a great premise for a podcast. It's very similar to one that we run once in a while when we're not on when she's not on medical hiatus. Um, chronic, not chronic, tactical pain podcast with
Oh,
Jenny Mack was very similar. But she talked about fibromyalgia and then chronic fatigue and stuff like that. And
oh, that's great.
she's on hiatus right now because her health is not the greatest. But
Yeah,
she has had like medical experts and just people who have like dealt with those stuff like that. Even interviewed my wife about like her medical issues and stuff like that.
yeah,
And yeah, it's a great podcast. So this is ground we've tread before here at the Sioux Empire, and I'm looking forward to it.
for sure. I think that once her health's feeling better, I'd love to have her on here. Kind of similar in the same vein to a guest I had, I think, back on episode 12. What was episode 12? Katie Roberts, dealing with an autoimmune disease,
Oh yeah,
uh, and uh, and kind of her lifelong struggle with that, and how that's impacted her life, and how she's uh, worked through several different tactics to be able to overcome that in that daily struggle. Right, and actually, she just launched her own podcast a few weeks ago,
Nice.
which is really, really exciting. I think they're about to hit episode 10. Darkest Corners podcast.
Darkest
It's,
Corners. Okay.
yeah, pretty cool. Talking about kind of some mythology and some kind of like a combination of a true crime and then lore, right?
Ooh,
Kind of mixed together. I've listened to an episode or two. It's quite good. I think you guys should give it a listen if you.
that's
So,
awesome.
but yes, go ahead and check that out. Be a pretty good episode. But yeah, so like I think one of the first stories I'm gonna be kind of talking about myself. I'm focusing on this time being able to provide a little bit more of my own content. Right. One, since I'm a bit healthier mentally than I was when I first started the podcast, I was dealing with a lot of interviews, almost always an interview previously, mostly because the thought of doing my own content every single week was a bit intimidating to me at the time. And
It's intimidating for everyone. I've had stand-up comedians who have performed in like large, fairly damn large venues. They come in here and everyone is clammed up. Everyone, no matter their background, they're clammy for the first, I say, 15 minutes. They
yeah,
need 15 minutes to warm up, and then as you get more used, I'm to the point now where I'm just going, yeah, I'm podcasting, whatever. It's like I got my pajama shirt, and I haven't done anything with my hair in like a month, but let's rock.
I look super sexy despite of it,
Oh,
Robert.
thank you.
But and so, but I think I have some really cool, interesting stories to tell uh, about my own process of overcoming, and so I think we'll spend some time on that over the next few episodes as well. But
Speak to what you know.
but we'll definitely be bringing some guests on. I don't have anyone specific lined up yet, but I think there'll be some really cool stories that I'll be able to find and tell. Probably eventually be able to bring some people in here with me, so I don't look quite so lonely on the couch. But then we'll definitely be bringing some people in remotely, streaming some people in who have some cool stories to tell. I'm excited to see what those are. Um, kind of like the first thing I'm going to talk about, I guess, on this episode. Um, is something that new that I started. As I talked about before, I started therapy almost 2 years ago. Exactly, a little over 2 years ago. I just crossed my 2 year anniversary called DBT, dialectic behavioral therapy, which is very, very focused on skills. Skills particularly focused in the realm of emotion regulation, interpersonal effectiveness, and distress tolerance, right? So much more involved in that than just those things, but it's really, really focused on the ability to be able to take back control of your life and give you a specific set of skills that you can use to overcome your issues and your struggles. Um, and it's been a really impactful therapy in my life. I say that saved my life.
Wow.
I likely would have died. I likely would have killed myself within a few weeks of before if I hadn't started that. Within a few weeks of me starting that. At that time in my life, it was a rough spot for me, and so it was kind of a last ditch effort for me, and it's been one of the greatest decisions I've made in my life. But I am still actively involved in that therapy because there's a lot to overcome. Like there's a lot of trauma and issues. Like I'm night and day different than I was 2 years ago, even a year ago, much as
Sure.
hell, even like 6 or 7 months ago,
It's a
which is
journey,
crazy.
you know?
Yeah, and so something that I haven't talked about a ton before on the podcast because I've been a bit ashamed of it, but I'll be talking about it a little bit more now. Is a pretty big trauma I went through with most of my life, which is relationship with my dad. And so something I started about 5 weeks ago now with my therapist, Amber Chan, at South Dakota DVT. If you're looking for a great therapist, I think she has a 6 month wait list right now. But she is the absolute best therapist in South Dakota, I believe. So, um, like, it's something called prolonged exposure, which is a certain type of therapy to deal with PTSD, which is something that took me a long time to accept that I had, which is something that for most people would seem a little bit, hard to believe that you wouldn't be able to believe you had PTSD, right? But PTSD in our media and our culture tends to be very much associated with I'm not even gonna say real, but very visceral traumas, like being in war, right? Directly suffering, violent sexual assaults and things of that nature. And in my particular PTSD, it was a result of prolonged emotional and physical abuse at the hands of my father, probably about 12 years worth, which for me, for a long time, I justified by treating it as normal, right? In every single way that I thought and talked about it. And so one of the first things that we had to do in my therapy with Amber there was begin to recognize that um, that it was a trauma in like the first place, which is something that's incredibly hard to do. And so you know, next time on the podcast, I'll be a little bit more prepared to talk about this, and I'll bring some notes and stuff I have. But something I want to talk about is how to begin to recognize that you've had a trauma. Like, and don't get me wrong, I'm no therapist. Don't pretend to be, but there are actually diagnostic measures that are really simple to begin to diagnose whether or not you might be suffering from PTSD associated with trauma. Um, and all different types of trauma. And a lot of people, right, might be surprised to find that they suffer from PTSD and it's something that's actually holding them back in their lives. Because to kind of talk about how we started down this path, right, and I think that's kind of what I'll focus on today is this idea that I had a big job coming up for a client, and it's something that I'd known about for weeks and weeks and weeks, probably like 4 or 5 weeks, and I was completely pushing it off, just completely procrastinating the hell out of it, as I have often done with many things in my life. And what I began to realize in my weekly sessions with Amber was that I had this tendency to hardcore avoid things that cause me distress in relation to client memories of the abuse I suffered at the hands of my father, particularly the emotional abuse and the beliefs and the kind of the internal beliefs that I've held for probably 15 plus years, based on what he would say about me, to me. And I was avoiding those things. And what I began to realize is that all of a sudden this job is coming up, and I am now incapable of doing the action that I'm capable, taking the action that I'm capable of taking, right, and performing the things and providing results for my clients that I know I'm capable of doing because of these internalized beliefs. I was completely avoiding doing any work related to this project, which I began to realize this is a huge barrier to my success, even though I've taken all these steps forward, right? And I'm night and day different from where I was 3 years ago at this time. I am and still just running up against this wall that's actually been holding me back for far longer than just about anything else, right? It's something where I was dismissed from my college in my first year, right, due to failing grades, not because I'm not intelligent, but more because I avoided doing any of the work because I believed that I would fail, and so it kind of became a self-fulfilling prophecy for me, right? Before that, right, struggling to get jobs, to struggling to stay in relationships, and then fighting to come through school, through college, and actually eventually graduate, right? And every single step that I'd taken forward in my life, I'd been hindered by these beliefs that I would be a failure, and so that's what kind of started the work that I'm now doing with Amber, right? Which is beginning to recognize that I had gone through trauma. This is something that I had to work on. This is something that I had to begin to overcome. And so right now we're working through something called prolonged exposure, which is a type of therapy specifically designed to overcome PTSD. It's specifically designed to essentially get you back in those memories, to stop avoiding those memories, to deal with them, and to begin to change your belief system surrounding those memories. Because so many feelings of inadequacy and failure and shame and guilt, and just overall sadness. So many really powerful, intense emotions come up surrounding those experiences that you begin to develop belief systems and habits surrounding them. Because specifically with any sort of emotion, as I talked about before, right? Emotions are there for a reason, right? And they're really specific, but some of them are very intense and very difficult to deal with. And so a lot of the times we will kind of avoid them, right? And it's kind of like taking a beach ball and pushing it under the water, right? And so, specifically with PTSD and trauma, you're just taking that beach ball and you're avoiding those emotions, and so you're just pushing it under the water and pushing it under the water and pushing it in the water, which you can do for a really long time, right? But eventually, randomly, that beach ball is going to slip and it's going to pop up, and instead of just bobbing nicely to the surface and then floating away, it's going
Catastrophic.
to, yeah, just completely explode out of the water. And so that's what would happen for me and for many other people dealing with trauma, which is the slightest thing, right? Either a simple memory, right? A simple, for example, my dad was a fan of Brad Paisley, right? Which seems like, oh, why is that a big deal, right? And it's really not, right? But because I was suppressing these emotions for so long, occasionally, especially I'm a big fan of football, the Peyton Manning and Brad Paisley nationwide commercials would pop on. And all of a sudden I'd be reminded of my dad, and I'd be watching a Broncos game on Sunday afternoon, and all of a sudden I'd be crying, and I couldn't understand why, right? Just uncontrollable sobbing. And this is the type of pain that all of a sudden begins to really negatively impact your life, and it starts to drive you to to do avoidance activities, right? And so it's you start to avoid doing things, anything that might remind you or trigger those emotions, right? In an effort to keep that beach ball under the water. And so that's what I was beginning to do, right? And that's what I have repeatedly been doing in my life, right? From school to my business to my love life to every interaction that I've ever had has been all focused on avoiding that trauma and avoiding dealing with those beliefs and those emotions. And so that's the work that we're starting with now, which is going to be a long and interesting journey, which I will talk about at length on here because it's something that one I super believe is really important for a lot of people to hear about, as well as important for me to be able to talk about it. Because for a long time I felt a lot of shame about that trauma, and I haven't talked about it openly. And so it's amazing what all of a sudden having the possibility of whatever you're saying being out in front of an unknown amount of people in the future can do to actually suddenly release that shame. As crazy as it seems, right? But it almost seems the more people are aware of that thing, the less shame you feel, which is actually super scientifically sound. Because the urges with shame that I've talked about before, right? Something called action urges are to hide, to look down, to avoid looking at people, right? To avoid sharing, you want to hide. And so the more open you are with your shame and the emotions that are triggering it, the less you'll experience that invalid feeling. And so it's one of the biggest reasons I'm also going to be doing this again as well. Um, so yeah, let's see here. Is there anything else I want to talk about? Right, we've been going for
So sounds like you got a plan. Uh, right now, our plan is bi-weekly put out episodes.
yep,
So we'll be live streaming again this time in 2 weeks,
yeah. So
and
that'll be the fourth, I believe.
I believe so.
I believe so. Be very exciting day. It's the day before I go back to Rochester for my annual appointments.
Oh,
So be some fun stuff to talk about then.
well, bet.
Yeah, and then yeah, really really excited to be back here. Um, and is there anything else off the top of my head that I can talk about? But no, I feel pretty good. So like I said, Overcoming Podcast with me, Caleb Van Born. We'll cover all kinds of fun stuff related to overcoming your struggles. Be sure to check us out on twitch.tv/the Sioux Empire, facebook.com/the Overcoming Podcast. No, Facebook.com/overcoming PC, Instagram.com @overcomingpc or @overcomingpc on Instagram. We are also @overcomingpc on Twitter. And we are the Overcoming Podcast with Caleb Van Born on YouTube. But you should also eventually be able to see us some stuff on the Sioux Empire on YouTube.
Yeah, right now we're streaming on the Sioux Empire on YouTube as well.
Great. And so that'll be really, really exciting. We're going to be all sorts of places, so be sure to go check all of those places. Drop a follow, drop a like, drop a share, and all the fun, cool stuff that we put out. We'll probably be putting out some cool stuff related to other podcasts on the network, which I'm really excited to get far more familiar with as time goes on, and maybe get some of those people on here to talk about their stories of overcoming, because something I talked about in the past and something I will definitely talk about in the future is that there's no struggle too big or too small. As long as there's anything that has impacted your ability to succeed in your life, it's something worth talking about and something that you had to overcome. And so those are stories that I want to hear and stories I want to talk about. And so there are all kinds of people that we will get on here. And I'm really excited to hear from all of them and to hear from you. So go ahead and email me at overcomingpc@gmail.com. That is our email address. So if you have anything that you'd like to share, any stories that you'd like to tell me about your own process of overcoming, any guests that you'd like to see on the show, please send them to me there, or you can always message me on any of our socials. So thanks so much for tuning in, and have a great rest of your Sunday.
Have a good one, everybody.